In ancient Rome, dental hygiene was surprisingly advanced for its time, but also shockingly unappealing by today's standards. Wealthy Romans were obsessed with white teeth and sweet breath, but their methods were anything but elegant. One of the more disturbing practices involved brushing their teeth with a mixture of powdered mouse brains and, believe it or not, urine. Why urine? Because it contains ammonia, a powerful bleaching agent. The Romans didn't know the chemistry, but they noticed its whitening effect. In fact, imported Portuguese urine was considered the most effective, and it was so highly valued that it was actually taxed under Emperor Nero. As strange as it sounds, this wasn't seen as gross. In their culture, using strong-smelling substances to purify or cleanse was quite normal. And mice, small, disposable animals, easily sacrificed in the name of beauty. Combine these ingredients into a gritty paste, and you had the Roman version of toothpaste. It might not sound luxurious now, but in a society that valued appearance as a sign of status and discipline, even this strange concoction made sense. In a world without minty freshness, Romans chose whatever tools they had to impress with a dazzling, albeit oddly scented smile. In the bustling heart of ancient Roman cities, public toilets weren't just places to relieve oneself, they were social arenas. Rows of stone benches with keyhole-shaped openings were lined up side by side, without any partitions. Privacy, that concept didn't quite exist in Roman sanitation culture. Men and women often used separate facilities, but within those spaces, conversation flowed as freely as the water in the drains beneath them. Beneath each seat, a flowing water channel carried waste away. In front of the benches, another stream flowed where users would clean a tersorium, a sponge attached to a stick. This communal cleaning tool was soaked in vinegar or salt water and passed around among users. Hygienic by Roman standards, horrifying by modern ones. Despite the modern cringe factor, these toilets served a critical function. They were considered signs of Roman civilization's advancement, running water, drainage, and public cleanliness. But more than that, they were gathering spots. Neighbors gossiped, businessmen discussed deals, and politics were debated, all while doing their business. In a way, it was the Roman version of a coffee shop, just with a very different kind of seat. To truly understand Roman daily life, you have to look beyond emperors and battles, into the quiet corners of the home. There, in almost every Roman household, stood a small shrine called a lararium. Inside it lived the lares, protective spirits of the household. Romans believed these spirits watched over the family, the home, and even the ancestors. They weren't gods in the traditional sense, but sacred figures tied to the safety and fortune of everyday life. Each morning, the head of the family would offer a small gift, perhaps a bit of bread, wine, or incense. On special occasions, like weddings, harvests, or birthdays, the family gathered at the shrine to honor the lares with prayers and miniature sacrifices. Their images, often small statues or painted figures, were treated with deep respect. This practice reveals a tender side of Roman spirituality. While they honored mighty deities like Jupiter or Mars in grand temples, their most frequent prayers were whispered at home, asking the lares for health, protection, and harmony. These spirits were the silent guardians of the family's soul, reminding Romans that divinity wasn't just found in the heavens, but in the heart of the home. Beauty was serious business in ancient Rome, especially for the elite. Hairstyles weren't just fashion statements, they were social markers, signaling status, wealth, and even political leanings. But maintaining those elaborate updos and golden curls wasn't easy. To achieve trendy hair colors, Roman women turned to mixtures that would horrify modern salon-goers. One common dye recipe combined goat fat with the ashes of burned beechwood. When applied, the thick, greasy paste altered the hair's tone over time, often resulting in shades of reddish-brown or even a brassy blonde. Blonde hair, especially, was highly prized, associated with exotic beauty and youthful appeal. Since natural blondes were rare in Italy, wigs made from Germanic slaves' hair were popular among the wealthy. Those who couldn't afford wigs used dyes no matter how smelly or uncomfortable. Some even bleached their hair in the sun using vinegar and herbs. This pursuit of beauty came with a cost. The harsh chemicals damaged the hair and scalp. But in Rome's competitive social world, appearances mattered, even if it meant enduring goat fat and soot. After all, when your looks helped secure power and attention, no beauty routine was too extreme. Picture a lavish Roman banquet. Bronze platters gleam, the scent of roast boar and honey-glazed figs fills the air. Musicians play softly in the background, and yet not a single fork is on the table. That's because Romans didn't use them. Instead, they ate with their fingers, a practice considered perfectly refined at the time. Each dish was cut or pre-prepared into bite-sized portions by servants, making it easy to pick up. Spoons and knives were used occasionally, but fingers did most of the work. To manage the mess, diners wiped their hands on cloth napkins or more commonly, the edge of the communal tablecloth which ran the length of the table. That same cloth might be reused at the next meal, stains and all. In elite homes, guests reclined on couches, leaning on one elbow and eating with the other hand. This laid-back posture wasn't just for comfort, it was a display of elegance. Only the poor sat at tables. For Romans, mealtime was more about social bonding than clean hands. Good conversation, abundant wine, and indulgence mattered more than manners by today's standards. So yes, they ate with their hands, and no, they didn't mind a little sauce under their nails. Forget plush mattresses and memory foam. Typical Roman bed was a wooden frame laced with ropes, topped with a sack stuffed full of straw, feathers, or wool. If you were lucky, it was layered with blankets and pillows, but comfort was relative. The ropes often sagged, needing to be tightened regularly, which gave rise to the phrase "sleep tight." The wealthier you were, the more stuffing you could afford, and maybe even imported linens. In most homes, bedrooms were small, dark, and minimally decorated. Beds weren't just for sleeping either. They were used for lounging, reading, and even dining. The Romans loved reclining, especially during feasts, where guests would lie sideways and reach for food from shared platters. For the poor, sleep meant lying on hard surfaces or straw mats in communal rooms. Entire families sometimes shared one cramped space. Despite the grandeur of Roman architecture, everyday life was less luxurious than we imagine. A Roman patrician might command armies by day and return home to a bed that squeaked and scratched. Yet for them, the bed wasn't the centerpiece of relaxation. It was just another utility in a world that prized order, function, and discipline. In ancient Rome, beauty often came at a deadly cost to achieve the pale porcelain complexion that symbolized wealth and high status. Roman women and sometimes men applied makeup made with white lead. Known as cerussa, this substance was mixed with vinegar to create a paste that could be smeared across the face. The goal, a ghostly white glow that set aristocrats apart from laborers tanned by the sun. Fortunately, lead is highly toxic. Over time, repeated application caused hair loss, skin corrosion, and serious internal poisoning. Ironically, the very thing that was meant to enhance their appearance ended up damaging it. But beauty trends are stubborn, and Romans continued using it, ignoring the growing toll on their health. To enhance the effect, women also used red ochre for blush and soot or antimony for eyeliner. The desire to look youthful, delicate, and divine was so strong that it overruled safety. These rituals weren't just vanity, they were a form of identity, social rank, and power. In chasing beauty, Romans unknowingly waged a slow war against their own bodies. And yet, to them, the illusion of health and nobility was worth almost any price. In the glamorous circles of Roman high society, hair was more than just a style, it was a statement. Elaborate hairstyles signified not just beauty, but status, culture, and even political allegiance. To keep up with ever-changing trends, wealthy Roman women turned to wigs made from real human hair. And not just any hair-blonde hair from Germanic slaves was especially prized for its exotic color and texture. These wigs were considered luxury items, collected from prisoners of war and enslaved women brought back from Roman campaigns in northern Europe. They were often styled into towering curls, intricate braids, or piled into sculptural buns, then secured with pins, combs, and nets. For the Roman elite, wearing such a wig wasn't seen as strange, it was a mark of sophistication and wealth. It allowed women to effortlessly switch styles, show off new fashions, and stand out in public events or religious ceremonies. Ironically, the hair of conquered enemies became the crown of the Roman elite. Beauty was built on domination and style on subjugation. In each golden lock, a silent power dynamic was woven. reminding everyone who had been ruled. Though we often imagine gladiators as doomed slaves fighting to the death, the reality was more complex. Some were slaves, yes, but many were volunteers seeking fame, fortune, or redemption. In the Roman Empire, gladiators could become household names. Fans cheered them like sports stars, kids traded figurines of them, and noble women sometimes sent them love letters or locks of hair. These men trained in special schools called ludi, where they ate high-carb, low-fat diets designed to bulk them up. A sister, drinking a tonic made from the ashes of charred plants or animal bones. This ash drink, rich in calcium and minerals, was believed to strengthen their bodies and help heal broken bones. It tasted awful, but strength was everything in the arena. The ash concoction was like the ancient version of a protein shake, consumed after intense training or a brutal match. The public adored them. Posters announced their fights. Betting was rampant. Some gladiators earned their freedom and others lost their lives, but for a short time they basked in glory. In a society obsessed with spectacle, a blood-soaked arena could make you a legend. One of the biggest myths about ancient Rome is the infamous vomitorium. For years, people believed this was a special room where Romans went to throw up during lavish banquets so they could eat more. But that's totally false. The word vomitorium actually refers to something far less disgusting. It was the architectural name for the passageways in Roman amphitheaters and stadiums that allowed large crowds to spew forth quickly into or out of the venue. These cleverly designed exits helped tens of thousands of spectators flow in and out of the Colosseum in minutes. The misunderstanding likely came from early scholars who mistranslated the term or tried to link it with the Roman love of feasting. While it's true that some Romans overindulged and vomiting may have occasionally occurred, there was never a designated puke room for diners. So next time someone jokes about Romans stuffing themselves and running to a vomitorium, just smile, because in reality it wasn't about gluttony, it was about brilliant design. Leave it to the Romans to build exits so efficient, they're still influencing stadium architecture today. The strength and stamina of a Roman soldier were legendary, and for good reason. A typical day for a legionary could involve marching up to 20 miles, fully geared in armor, weapons, supplies, and rations. That's roughly the weight of a modern military backpack, but without the benefit of breathable fabrics or ergonomic straps. Their iron armor clanked with every step, their hobnailed sandals pounded the dirt roads, and their massive rectangular shields had to be carried with care. But this wasn't just punishment, it was training. Rome's power depended on the mobility of its legions. These marches allowed armies to travel swiftly across the empire, build camps from scratch, and be battle-ready in hours. And they weren't just walking. Soldiers sang, drilled formations, and even built roads as they marched. Rest stops were brief and meals were plain: dried meat, hard bread, and wine diluted with water. At night, they built fortified camps complete with moats, walls, and watchtowers. This brutal routine forged discipline like steel. Roman armies were feared not just for their weapons, but for their relentless endurance. To be a legionary wasn't just about fighting. It was about surviving the march and being ready to conquer when you arrived. When discipline broke down in the Roman army, punishment was severe, sometimes unimaginably brutal. One of the most terrifying was decimation. From the Latin word decem, meaning 10, decimation involved executing 1 in every 10 men of a disgraced unit. If a group of soldiers deserted, mutinied, or failed spectacularly in battle, their commanders could order this punishment. But the horror didn't stop at random execution. It was far more psychological. The condemned were chosen by lot. Once selected, each man was beaten to death by his fellow soldiers with clubs or stones. This wasn't just punishment, it was a horrifying reminder. Your life depended on your discipline, and your comrades could be your executioners. Even Roman generals hesitated to use decimation, knowing it could shatter morale. but in extreme cases it served as a fearsome deterrent. The survivors, traumatized and broken, would think twice before disobeying an order again. Modern militaries find it unthinkable. But in the iron logic of Roman warfare, unity was everything. And when fear failed, Rome made sure terror succeeded. The Romans were not known for superstition, but when it came to power and pride, even the absurd was on the table. One of the strangest episodes in Roman history involved a war not against people, but against the sea itself. In 39 BCE, the infamous Emperor Caligula, whose reign was riddled with madness, reportedly ordered his soldiers to march to the shores of the English Channel and attack the water, according to historical sources. He commanded them to stab the waves with swords, collect seashells as spoils of war, and declare victory over Neptune, the god of the sea. Why, historians still debate. Some believe it was a display of dominance against nature. Others say it was pure theatrical madness, or an attempt to humiliate his troops and show who really held power. In Roman culture, symbolic acts carried weight. Even if the act was irrational, the message was loud and clear. Not even nature could defy the emperor's will. It's one of the most bizarre moments in Roman military lore. But in a world ruled by ego and spectacle, sometimes stabbing the ocean made more political sense than stabbing your enemies. The Roman army didn't fight just for glory, they fought for salarium. That's right. The root of our word salary comes from sal, the Latin word for salt. Why salt? Because in the early days of the Roman Republic, salt was as valuable as gold. Roman soldiers often received a portion of their wages in salt or money to buy salt. This vital mineral preserved food, cleaned wounds, and sustained life in a time before refrigeration. Without salt, armies couldn't travel far, and supplies would rot in days. It wasn't just a seasoning, it was survival. Over time, the salarium evolved into a broader term for soldier pay. But the link remained so strong that the idea of earning one's salt became synonymous with being worthy of your wages. Rome's attention to logistics, food, water, pay was part of what made their military machines so effective. They didn't just train soldiers to fight, they paid them to stay. And that little white crystal played a big role in keeping the empire running. Roman roads weren't just dirt paths, they were feats of engineering that stitched the empire together like a giant web. Built with layers of stone, sand, gravel, and tightly packed soil. These roads were crowned in the center to allow rainwater to drain to the sides. Some were so expertly constructed that they are still in use today, beneath modern highways and rural roads across Europe. The Romans built over 250,000 miles of roads across their territories. The most famous, the Via Appia, connected Rome to southern Italy and was nicknamed the Queen of Roads. These highways allowed the Roman legions to move with speed, merchants to trade across vast distances, and messages to be sent from Britain to Syria in record time. But roads weren't just functional, they were political. Every paved mile reminded people who ruled the land. Stones were stamped with the names of emperors who commissioned them, turning infrastructure into propaganda. Today, hikers still walk Roman roads. Cars roll over their foundations, and with every step, wheel, or hoof, we're reminded that Rome didn't just conquer the world, it connected it. In the early days of naval warfare, Rome was a land power struggling to challenge Carthage's dominance at sea. But when it came to innovation, the Romans never hesitated to get creative. Enter the corvette, a brutal invention that turned naval battles into hand-to-hand street fights. The corvette was a rotating bridge, fitted with a deadly spike on the end. When a Roman ship pulled alongside an enemy vessel, this massive gangplank would swing down, slam onto the enemy's deck, and embed itself like a hook. Soldiers could then storm across the bridge and engage in close combats, something the heavily armored Romans were far better at than sailors. This clever strategy neutralized the Carthaginians' naval skills and gave Rome a fighting edge. The corvus helped secure major victories in the First Punic War, including the legendary Battle of Mylae. However, the corvus had a downside. It made ships top-heavy and more prone to sinking in rough waters. Eventually, the device was phased out, but not before helping Rome transform from a landlocked power into a Mediterranean empire. The corvus wasn't just a bridge, it was a weaponized innovation that changed the tide of naval history. To be a Roman soldier meant relentless training, and the weapons they used for practice were as brutal as the battles themselves. In training camps across the empire, legionaries were issued wooden swords known as rudis. But these weren't lightweight playthings. They were deliberately crafted to be heavier, often twice the weight of a real steel gladius. Why? Because if a soldier could master speed, balance, and precision with an overweight training sword, using the real weapon in battle would feel effortless. The extra weight built muscle, enhanced endurance, and honed technique. Soldiers practiced striking posts, sparring with partners, and even simulating full battle sequences. This training philosophy extended beyond swords. Shields, javelins, and armor were often worn or carried longer during drills to prepare men for the exhausting conditions of war. Rome didn't leave victory to chance. Every movement was rehearsed, every step calculated. This rigorous system turned farmers and volunteers into lethal warriors. By the time a legionary entered the battlefield, his sword felt like an extension of his body, and that made all the difference. In Rome, discipline wasn't just an ideal. It was baked into the blade. Long before Julius Caesar became dictator of Rome, he lived a life full of daring exploits. One of the most legendary, his kidnapping by pirates at age 25, while sailing near the island of Pharmacusa in the Aegean Sea. Caesar was captured by Cilician pirates who demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver. Caesar, insulted by the low price on his head, insisted they raise it to 50. While his associates gathered the money, Caesar lived among the pirates for over a month. But he wasn't your average hostage, he laughed. Wrote poetry, exercised, and even scolded his captors. When they interrupted his naps, he joked that once he was free, he'd have them crucified. The pirates thought he was bluffing, wasn't. After the ransom was paid and he was released, Caesar immediately raised a fleet, pursued the pirates, captured them, and, true to his word, had them crucified. He did, however, order their throats to be cut first. As a final act of mercy, this bold episode wasn't just a tale of revenge, revealed the sharp mind, icy confidence, and iron will that would one day shake the Roman world. While many ancient armies relied on sheer numbers and brute strength, Rome added something revolutionary to its military machine: battlefield medicine. Roman legions didn't just march with swords, they marched with surgeons. Each legion had a medicus, a trained medical officer responsible for treating the wounded. These medics carried surgical tools made of bronze and iron, some of which looked strikingly modern: scalpels, forceps, bone saws, and even catheters. Field hospitals, or valetudinaria, were set up near camps to treat injured soldiers. Surgeons cleaned wounds with wine or vinegar, stitched lacerations, set broken bones, and even performed amputations. Sanitation was rudimentary by today's standards, but advanced compared to other ancient cultures. Rome understood that a healthy army was an effective one. Veterans were valued, and saving lives meant preserving experience. Soldiers were also encouraged to follow strict hygiene routines, bathing, changing bandages, and avoiding spoiled food. These medical advancements didn't just keep soldiers alive, they laid the groundwork for military medicine today. The Roman army didn't just conquer with weapons, it conquered with knowledge. In the Roman military, courage was everything and cowardice had a price. Soldiers who fled from battle weren't just seen as weak. They were seen as threats to the entire legion's honor and discipline. The punishment? Sometimes death at the hands of their own comrades. One method was public execution. A deserter might be beaten, stoned, or run through with a sword. But the most dreaded punishment was fusturioma, brutal beating by fellow soldiers using clubs. It was designed to humiliate, punish, and send a terrifying message to the rest of the ranks. Even worse was the practice of decimation for entire units that showed cowardice or mutiny. Rome demanded loyalty, and the consequences of failure weren't just personal, they could ripple through the entire army. These punishments may seem cruel, but they were part of what made the Roman military machine so effective. Fear of the enemy was one thing. Fear of your own brothers, in arms. They kept you fighting when your instincts screamed to run. In Rome, survival wasn't just about strength. It was about never turning your back on the line. In 64 AD, a devastating fire swept through Rome, destroying 10 of the city's 14 districts. Amid the chaos, rumors spread like flames. Emperor Nero, rather than acting to stop the disaster, had climbed to a rooftop and played the lyre. singing of the fall of Troy as his own city turned to ash. But was it true? Historical sources disagree. Tacitus, one of Rome's most trusted historians, claims Nero was even in the city when the fire started, and that he rushed back to coordinate relief efforts, even opening his palaces to the homeless. Yet the image of the emperor strumming his lyre while citizens screamed in the streets stuck in the public's imagination. Nero's reputation for vanity, extravagance, and cruelty didn't help. He had a theater obsession, often performing on stage and forcing nobles to applaud. So whether or not the rooftop concert happened, it felt believable. To make matters worse, Nero later blamed the fire on the Christians, leading to one of the first state-sponsored persecutions of the faith. Whether guilty or not, Nero's name became forever linked to arrogance in the face of tragedy. The phrase "fiddling while Rome burns" still echoes that chilling legend. Of all Rome's emperors, few were as infamous or bizarre as Caligula. Ascending to power at just 24, he began his reign with promise, but quickly descended into madness, extravagance, and cruelty. Perhaps the most famous story of his rule is his love for a horse named Incitatus. Caligula didn't just treat Incitatus like a prized animal, he pampered him like royalty. The horse had a marble stall, an ivory manger, a purple blanket, and even a house with servants. But that wasn't enough. According to sources like Suetonius, Caligula planned to make Incitatus a senator. Some say he even named him a priest. While historians debate whether he followed through or was just mocking the Senate, the message was clear. Caligula held utter contempt for Rome's political class. By elevating a horse to power, he may have been saying a horse could do their jobs better, or simply showing that no one could stop him. This story, whether satire or fact, paints a vivid portrait of unchecked power and twisted ego. When one man controlled an empire, not even the absurd was off the table. If you think modern rulers have scandalous love lives, meet Elagabalus. Rising to power as a teenager in 218 AD, he reigned for only 4 years, but left behind tales so shocking they still stun historians today. Among them, he married 5 times, including once to a man named Zodicus, a handsome athlete from Smyrna. This wasn't just rumored romance. Elagabalus publicly presented Zodicus as his spouse, reportedly calling himself the wife and enjoying being addressed as the queen. Ancient sources claim he even offered gold to doctors who could surgically give him female genitalia, making some modern scholars consider him one of history's earliest recorded transgender figures. His reign was also marked by extreme religious upheaval. A priest of the Eastern sun god Elagabal, he replaced Jupiter at the head of the Roman pantheon and forced Romans to worship his deity. This, along with his scandalous personal life, enraged Rome's conservative elite. In the end, Elagabalus was assassinated by his own guards at age 18. His body was thrown into the Tiber River, and his memory was condemned. But his life remains one of the boldest, most controversial chapters in Roman imperial history. On the Ides of March 15th, 44 BC, the most famous betrayal in Roman history took place. Julius Caesar, fresh off a civil war and crowned dictator for life, entered the Senate expecting routine political business. Instead, he was surrounded by a group of senators who stabbed him 23 times. Among the assassins were men he considered allies, Brutus, Cassius, and others who had once fought beside him. Some reports say Caesar initially tried to fight back, but stopped when he recognized Brutus, allegedly uttering the famous line, "Et tu, Brute?" Whether he actually said that is debated, but the symbolism stuck. The assassins believed they were saving the Republic. Caesar's growing power had terrified the Senate, but their plot backfired spectacularly. Instead of restoring democracy, they unleashed chaos. Rome fell into more civil war, and within a few years, Caesar's grandnephew, Octavian, later Augustus, took power as emperor, ending the Republic forever. Caesar's death didn't stop tyranny. It ushered in the imperial age. His murder, meant to defend liberty, became the spark that destroyed it. When we imagine a Senate today, we picture grand halls filled with desks and formal debate. But the Roman Senate had no fixed home, especially in its early days. Instead, senators often met in temples, the most sacred and politically neutral spaces in the city. The most famous was the Curia Hostilia, an early Senate house, but meetings also took place in the Temple of Jupiter or the Temple of Concord. This wasn't just about convenience. Religion and politics were deeply intertwined in Rome. Holding sessions in a temple invoked the gods as witnesses and reminded senators of their duty to the state. Sacred space gave decisions divine legitimacy. Oaths were sworn before statues. Important votes were cast under the watchful gaze of gods and goddesses. Even the act of convening required religious rituals to ensure the omens were favorable. This blend of civic and spiritual authority helped maintain order, at least on the surface. In truth, the temples echoed with rivalries, deals, and schemes. While the gods might have watched from above, it was mortals who played power games below. In the Roman tradition, it was common to deify emperors after their death, especially if their rule had brought stability or greatness. But some emperors refused to wait. They declared themselves gods while still alive and demanded worship from their subjects. Caligula again leads the charge. He reportedly dressed as Mercury, Jupiter, and even Venus, insisting on divine honors. He ordered temples built in his name and forced senators to bow before his statue. Nero also flirted with godhood, using divine language to describe himself and commissioning colossal statues portraying him as Apollo. The people's response? Mixed. Flattery of a living god could bring favor, but ridicule, resentment, and rebellion often simmered beneath the surface. For many Romans, deification was earned through greatness, not claimed through ego. Still, in a culture where gods shaped every aspect of life, blurring the line between emperor and deity was a potent tool. Worship wasn't just spiritual, it was political obedience. And in Rome, questioning a god on earth could be a deadly mistake. While the Roman Empire claimed to follow laws and traditions, the truth was much bloodier. Power often passed not through ballots or bloodlines, but blades. The title of emperor was supposed to be awarded by the Senate or inherited. Many emperors rose to power through murder. Between the 1st and 3rd centuries AD, dozens of emperors were assassinated, often by their own guards, allies, or family members. If a general was popular with the army, he might be declared emperor by his legions and march on Rome to take the throne by force. Sometimes the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's personal bodyguards, auctioned off the empire to the highest bidder. As in the infamous case of Didius Julianus in 193 AD, this instability turned the empire into a deadly game of survival. Emperors lived in constant fear, trusting few, purging rivals, and watching their backs. Some lasted decades. Others barely made it through dinner. In Rome, ambition was a ladder, but it was slippery with blood. Officially, Roman women had no political power. They couldn't vote, hold office, or speak in the Senate. But behind palace walls, powerful women shaped the fate of the empire from the shadows. Livia Drusilla, wife of Augustus, was one such force. Known for her intelligence and subtle manipulation, she influenced her husband's policies and positioned her son Tiberius to succeed him. Later, Agrippina the Younger, mother of Nero, wielded immense power during his early reign. She orchestrated assassinations, controlled access to the emperor, and even had coins minted with her image beside her son's. Women of the elite class used marriages, money, and familial alliances as political tools. They advised, schemed, and sometimes poisoned their way into influence. Even empresses who seemed quiet like Faustina or Julia Domna were often deeply involved in court politics. Though the law barred them from public office, Roman women with wealth and intelligence found ways to rule from behind the curtain. They weren't statues and togas, they were queens in all but name. Hollywood got it wrong. When a Roman crowd watched a gladiator fall in the arena, the emperor or presiding official had to decide the fighter's fate. But contrary to popular belief, a thumbs-down gesture probably didn't mean kill him. Ancient texts are vague, but most scholars believe the Latin phrase police verso didn't specify which direction. In fact, many argue that turning the thumb down, or even thrusting it horizontally, might have signaled mercy, while pointing the thumb up or out indicated a sword thrust meaning death. Gestures were not standardized, and different regions likely had their own traditions. The real decision often came down to crowd reaction and the quality of the fight. If the fallen gladiator fought bravely, the crowd might chant misses, a plea to spare him. If he performed poorly, they might call for death. So next time you see that iconic thumbs down in a movie, remember, the real Romans might have used that gesture to save a life, not end it. In the strict social hierarchy of ancient Rome, what you wore announced who you were. For senators, the symbol of their elite status was the toga praetexta, white toga edged with a broad purple stripe.
Owls.
The color wasn't chosen by accident. Purple dye, made from thousands of crushed sea snails, was incredibly expensive and reserved for the highest ranks. Wearing it wasn't just about fashion, it was a public declaration of authority. The wider the stripe, the greater the status. Generals, magistrates, and priests also had their own variations, each with specific colors and styles. Clothing laws called sumptuary laws regulated who could wear what. Only the emperor could wear a toga entirely dyed purple, a garment so rich it practically glowed. Even children of senators wore mini togas with stripes until they came of age. Slaves or commoners caught wearing forbidden colors could be fined or punished. In a society where everything was ranked gods, laws, families, even your robe was a scoreboard. Rome was a world of appearances, and every hem, fold, and stripe told a story of power. To impress guests at an elite Roman banquet, the host didn't just serve meat and wine, they served delicacies that shocked and dazzled. One such exotic treat, roasted dormice. These small, chubby rodents were considered a delicacy among the upper class, not pests. Romans didn't just throw them on a spit. The dormice were fattened up in special clay pots called gladiator, where they lived in darkness and overfed conditions like foie gras ducks of the rodent world. Once plump enough, they were stuffed with minced meat or herbs, roasted, and glazed with honey and poppy seeds for a sweet, savory finish. This wasn't everyday peasant food. Dormice dishes were expensive and symbolic and edible flex. Serving them showed that you were wealthy enough to indulge in culinary novelty and bold enough to challenge your guests' palates. The taste? It's probably something like oily chicken with a nutty finish. But in Rome, taste was only part of the game. Banquets were about spectacle, and nothing got people talking like a honey-glazed mouse on a silver platter. The Roman elite had extravagant tastes, and when it came to banquets, rarity was the height of refinement. Flamingo tongues were one such luxury. Yes, you read that? Right, Romans believed the tongue of a flamingo had a tender texture and subtle flavor, perfect for impressing guests. Served roasted or boiled and sometimes drenched in spices or fermented fish sauce, flamingo tongues were considered status food. Even more outrageous? Peacock brains. This was another sought-after delicacy, prized for its softness and scarcity. Some hosts served entire dishes made of just bird brains collected from dozens of exotic peacocks. These weren't everyday meals. They were edible theater. Hosts competed to serve the most exotic, expensive, or absurd foods as a way of demonstrating wealth and cultural sophistication. And if you think this sounds wasteful or grotesque, remember, in ancient Rome, food was a performance. The stranger, the rarer, the better. Dining wasn't just nourishment, it was a ritual of excess and prestige. And if you had to eat a bird's brain to prove your worth, so be it. Ancient Roman banquets were legendary for their excess. Picture this. Long tables covered in dishes, endless wine flowing, entertainment on every side, and guests eating until they literally couldn't eat anymore. But instead of stopping, some wealthy Romans took a shocking route. They vomited mid-meal just to make room for more. This wasn't universal, but among the elite, especially during decadent periods like the early empire. The practice of inducing vomiting was a well-known, though socially controversial habit. Some would even visit the vomitoria or keep feathers on hand to trigger gag reflexes. It sounds appalling today, but to some Romans, this was about demonstrating wealth and indulgence. They could afford to eat until it hurt. They could afford to waste food. Moderation wasn't the goal, extravagance was. Moralists like Seneca condemned this behavior, calling it disgusting and weak. But for others, it was part of the spectacle of Roman luxury, a warped reflection of status and self-control lost in a feast of excess. In Rome, even the act of overindulgence became a form of entertainment. Wine was a daily staple in ancient Rome, but not in the way we think of it. Drinking pure wine, especially strong or undiluted, was considered uncivilized, even barbaric. Instead, Romans diluted their wine with water and sometimes seawater, salt water. Why? The addition of seawater wasn't just about extending the drink, it added flavor and preserved the wine. Seawater wine had a briny sharpness that many Romans actually enjoyed. They called it a garum and believed it stimulated digestion. Herbs, honey, spices, and even resin were also added to flavor different blends. There were wines for every occasion: cheap sour wines for laborers, spiced wines for the wealthy, and sweet raisin wines for dessert. Heated wine was popular in winter, and chilled, snow-cooled versions were served in summer. And despite what we might imagine, wine was not just for pleasure. It was often safer than drinking city water, which could be contaminated. Even children drank diluted wine, though in very weak forms. In Rome, wine wasn't just a drink. It was a craft, a daily ritual, and a sign of civilization whether or not it had a splash of the Mediterranean in it. If ketchup is the king of American condiments, then garum was the emperor's choice in ancient Rome. Made by fermenting fish guts, blood, and salt in clay vats under the sun, for weeks, sometimes months, garum was the cornerstone of Roman flavor. The smell, overpowering; the taste, salty, savory, and pungent. Think soy sauce meets anchovies with a heavy punch. Romans poured it on everything: meats, vegetables, eggs, even fruit. Rich households used imported garum from Spain or North Africa. Poorer families made do with alec, the leftover sludge. Factories along the coast mass-produced it, and amphorae, filled with fishy liquid, crisscrossed the empire. Some versions were so prized, they were treated like fine wine, labeled by region and aged for flavor. Despite its gut-churning ingredients, garum was beloved. Romans believed it improved digestion and even used it medicinally. It made bad food tolerable and good food irresistible. Today, the closest culinary cousin is fish sauce in Southeast Asian cuisine. But in ancient Rome, garum wasn't just a condiment, it was a cultural obsession. In Rome, drinking wine straight was frowned upon. It wasn't just about taste, it was about morality and manners. Strong, undiluted wine was seen as wild and barbaric behavior, associated with drunkenness, bad judgment, and even madness. Civilized people diluted their wine, sometimes with 2 or 3 parts water to 1 part wine. This wasn't snobbery, it was practical. Roman wine was often strong, thick, and syrupy. Watering it down made it palatable and safer. Some believed undiluted wine could damage the body or spirit. Philosophers like Plato and Roman thinkers like Seneca warned against drinking it pure, linking it to moral decay. Watered wine was served at banquets, public events, and even religious ceremonies. The mixing itself was a ritual. A servant called the minister, or symposiarch, oversaw the proportions and ensured everyone stayed within the bounds of dignity until the late hours when rules loosened and debauchery crept in. To Romans, how you drank said who you were. Moderation was the mark of a respectable citizen. So if you wanted to be taken seriously at a Roman dinner party, don't raise your glass of undiluted wine. That was for the barbarians. We often picture Roman feasts overflowing with roasted meats and exotic dishes, and yes, the wealthy dined lavishly. But for most Romans, vegetables formed the foundation of their diet. Lentils, cabbage, onions, garlic, beans, and, most notably, lettuce, were staples on Roman tables. Lettuce held a special place. Romans believed it had medicinal properties, including the ability to induce sleep. It was often served at the end of meals to help diners relax after feasting. Writers like Pliny the Elder praised it for its cooling effects and even claimed it could reduce sexual desire, something the Stoic-minded elite sometimes welcomed. Meat, on the other hand, was expensive and reserved for special occasions. Most people got their protein from legumes, cheese, and fish. Even when meat was served, it was often stewed with vegetables to stretch the portions. Vegetables weren't seen as boring, they were essential. Romans cultivated gardens at home, traded produce in bustling markets, and used herbs and olive oil to enhance flavors. Their diet, rich in fiber and plant-based foods, likely contributed to their overall health, especially among the lower classes. Rome may have built empires with swords, but it fed its people with cabbage and chickpeas. If you thought serving dormice was extravagant, wait until you hear this. Wealthy Roman hosts sometimes served pies that, when cut open, released live birds. It wasn't about eating them, It was about shocking and entertaining guests. This wasn't a daily occurrence. It was reserved for elite banquets designed to impress or outshine a rival host. The pie would be carefully constructed with a hollow shell, and the birds, usually small finches or sparrows, would be placed inside just before serving. When the dish was sliced open, the birds would flutter into the room, chirping and flapping to the delight of the audience. This blend of culinary skill and theater turned food into performance art. It was the ancient version of saying, "Look how rich I am. I don't even need my food to make sense." These displays weren't just about taste. They were statements of power, wealth, and creativity. And while modern ethics would cringe at such waste for Romans, the more elaborate and jaw-dropping your feast, the more immortal your reputation became. In the dangerous game of Roman politics, a meal could be fatal. Assassination by poison was a constant threat, especially for emperors, generals, and wealthy elites. To protect themselves, they relied on pregustators, slaves or servants, who tasted every dish before it was served. These food tasters lived in constant fear. If the food was poisoned, they'd be the first to die. Some historians believe even trusted advisors or family members were sometimes asked to taste a bite just in case. It wasn't uncommon for emperors to change tasters regularly, fearing bribery or betrayal. Tasting wasn't limited to food. Wine, water, and even cosmetics or perfumes could be tested. Antidotes were kept close, especially the famous theriac, a complex potion with dozens of ingredients meant to counteract any known poison. The paranoia was justified. Poison was cheap, discreet, and difficult to trace. And in a society where ambition often outweighed loyalty, even dinner became a deadly gamble. For the powerful, every bite could be their last. For the slave beside them, tasting dinner meant stepping into the line of fire day after day. Roman banquets weren't just about food, they were marathons of indulgence, designed to impress, seduce, and entertain.
Ow.
In the homes of the rich, feasts could stretch from sunset to sunrise. Some lasted for days, broken only by brief naps and changes of wardrobe. Guests reclined on couches arranged in a U-shape around a central table. Between courses, performers entertained. Dancers, musicians, poets, acrobats, even trained animals. Slaves served dish after dish, sweet, sour, spicy, exotic. Between bites, guests drank wine, debated philosophy, recited poetry, or gossiped about politics. But it wasn't just about gluttony. Banquets were political tools. A successful host could win allies, influence votes, or show off wealth. Invitations were coveted. Exclusions were a public insult. Banquets had rules too. Etiquette mattered. Had to recline with elegance, speak with wit, and know when to flatter or jest. It was theater, and every guest played a role. In a world without cinema, concerts, or Instagram, the Roman banquet was the ultimate stage. And everyone, from emperor to senator, wanted the spotlight. The secret to Rome's architectural immortality wasn't just marble or grandeur, it was their astonishing concrete. Structures like aqueducts, temples, and harbors have stood for over 2 millennia. Many of them facing constant exposure to seawater and erosion. Modern engineers were puzzled. Why hasn't this concrete crumbled? The answer lies in the mixture. Roman concrete was made using volcanic ash, lime, and seawater, a combination that triggers a rare chemical reaction. Over time, this reaction actually strengthens the concrete, allowing it to heal microcracks and resist decay. In contrast, modern cement often weakens when exposed to salt water over long periods. The Romans didn't have labs, but they had keen observation. They noticed volcanic ash hardened well underwater, especially in areas like Pozzuoli near Naples. So they used it for their marine structures, like the harbors at Ostia and Cosa. Scientists today are studying this ancient formula to create more sustainable, self-healing materials. So, in an ironic twist, the future of green construction may lie in the volcanic dust of the Roman past. Rome's empire fell, but its walls still whisper the secrets of unbreakable stone. The Colosseum wasn't just a giant stone arena, it was a marvel of ancient engineering. Built in under a decade, it could seat over 50,000 spectators who gathered to watch gladiator battles, animal hunts, and staged naval battles. But what really made the Colosseum exceptional is a velarium, a vast retractable awning that shaded the audience from the sun. Made from hundreds of canvas panels supported by rigging and masts, the velarium was operated by Roman sailors, who knew how to manage complex ropes and sails. With careful coordination, they could deploy the shade across the top of the Colosseum, reducing heat and creating a more comfortable experience for the elite attendees below. Beneath the arena, a complex system of tunnels and elevators moved animals, props, and gladiators into place, turning the stage into a dynamic performance space. This wasn't just a stadium, it was a symbol of Rome's dominance, discipline, and decadence. Every element, from the crowd control to the awnings, screamed one message. Rome could entertain on a scale the world had never seen before. Today the Colosseum stands partially ruined, but it still inspires awe and envy from modern architects. Long before central heating, the Romans had already mastered the art of toasty toes. Their invention? The hypocaust system, a method of heating floors and walls, using hot air circulated beneath raised platforms. In public bathhouses and wealthy villas, furnaces were built beneath the floors. These furnaces heated air that flowed through a maze of brick columns and channels beneath the floor and inside hollow walls. The result? Comfortably warm interior, even on chilly winter mornings. This system was most famously used in the Thermae Grand public baths, where Romans gathered not just to bathe, but to socialize, exercise, and conduct business. Some private homes also had hippocausts, though the installation and upkeep made them a luxury reserved for the elite. The Romans didn't invent fire-heated rooms, but they perfected it on an architectural scale. Their heating systems are considered a forerunner of modern radiant floor heating. Imagine stepping barefoot onto warm stone in a Roman villa while sipping mulled wine. It wasn't just comfort, it was civilization made tangible. The warmth beneath their feet reminded Romans that they had mastered nature and luxury. Rome wasn't built in a day, but it flowed with water every day, thanks to its aqueducts. These towering structures, made of stone, brick, and concrete, transported fresh water from distant springs into the heart of the city. At their peak, Rome's 11 aqueducts delivered an astonishing 300 million gallons daily, enough to supply more than 1 million people. Some aqueducts stretched over 50 miles, combining underground channels, tunnels, and above-ground bridges. Water flowed solely by gravity, with a gentle slope engineered to maintain pressure and flow over vast distances. This wasn't just about drinking water. Rome's aqueducts supplied bathhouses, fountains, gardens, public toilets, and even private homes of the wealthy. The sheer scale of this infrastructure reflected the Roman belief in hygiene, urban beauty, and engineering supremacy. Maintenance was constant. Special crews patrolled the lines, clearing blockages and repairing leaks. Controlling water meant controlling health, cleanliness, and power. Rome turned nature into a public service in the aqueducts. Still standing in parts of Europe today, are a reminder of how one empire watered its greatness. Think the modern postal system is a modern marvel? The Romans beat us to it. Called the cursus publicus, their state-run courier service delivered messages, official documents, and even military orders across the vast empire. Relay stations every few miles provided fresh horses and food for couriers, ensuring messages could move at lightning speed for the era. But Rome didn't stop at private letters. They also had acta diurna, the world's earliest form of a daily newspaper. Literally meaning daily acts. These were carved or inscribed onto stone or metal tablets and posted in public forums. The content? Court decisions, political appointments, military victories, births, deaths, and even celebrity gossip. This open display of information allowed citizens to stay updated, at least those who could read. Over time, versions of these records were copied and distributed to outlying provinces, ensuring even distant governors were in the loop. In a time without printing presses or smartphones, Rome managed a functioning news and mail system over an empire stretching from Britain to Syria. It was slow, sure, but incredibly efficient for its age. Rome didn't just conquer, it communicated. Walk into a modern surgical theater, and you'll see shiny stainless steel instruments, scalpels, forceps, clamps. Now walk through time into a Roman military field tent-tanned. You'll find tools that look eerily familiar. That's because ancient Roman doctors invented or refined many of the same instruments we still use. Surgeons in the Roman army were highly trained. They performed amputations, removed arrowheads, treated fractures, and cleaned wounds, all with bronze and iron tools. They used bone saws, speculums, retractors, and even catheters. Their scalpels had replaceable blades and came in different shapes for precise cuts. They believed in cleanliness, sterilizing instruments with boiling water or wine. And while anesthesia wasn't available, patients were sometimes sedated with opium or herbal mixtures. Much of this knowledge came from the writings of Roman medical authorities like Galen and Celsus, whose texts were used for centuries. Their battlefield experiences became the foundation of Western surgical practice. Rome's legacy wasn't just in marble and empire, it was in healing. Their tools saved lives in tents and temples alike, and their designs continue to influence medicine today. Before Julius Caesar's reforms, the Roman calendar was a mess, filled with miscalculations and political manipulation. Priests who controlled the calendar could add or subtract days to benefit allies or delay elections. The result? Chaos. In 46 BC, Caesar put an end to the confusion, advised by the Alexandrian astronomer Sosigenes. He introduced the Julian calendar, a 365-day year with a leap day every 4 years. This new system aligned with the solar year and brought stability to timekeeping. The months were reorganized, and July was named in Caesar's honor. Later, Augustus would name August after himself, completing the imperial timestamp. The Julian calendar reigned for over 1,600 years, before being fine-tuned into the Gregorian calendar we use today. But the structure 365 days, leap years, month lengths, is still Caesar's gift to time. Thanks to this bold reform, farmers could plant with confidence. Festivals fell in the right season, and history found its rhythm. Julius Caesar may have fallen to daggers, but his calendar still governs our lives. He's sundial.
These instruments
Measured the shadow cast by a rod onto a marked surface, dividing daylight into hours. Large sundials adorned public spaces, while smaller ones were carried like pocket watches. But what about cloudy days or nighttime? Enter the water clock, or clepsydra. These clever devices used a slow, steady flow of water between containers to mark the passage of time. The rise or fall of water levels corresponded to engraved time markings. Some water clocks were sophisticated, featuring gears, alarms, and intricate decorations. They were used in courts, bathhouses, and military camps, anywhere precise timing mattered. Time in Rome wasn't always exact by modern standards. An hour varied in length depending on the season, shorter in winter, longer in summer. But the concept of measuring time, scheduling events, and organizing society by the clock was already deeply embedded. The sundial's shadow and the drip of the clepsydra were early rhythms of order in an empire built on discipline. Roman roads weren't just built for marching legions, they were built to last. Constructed with multiple layers of stone, gravel, and sand, and often topped with flat paving stones. These roads followed strict engineering principles. They were crowned in the center for water runoff and lined with drainage ditches. The result? Roads so durable that many are still in use today, either as foundations for modern highways or preserved in cities like Rome, Pompeii, and parts of Britain and France. The Via Appia, known as the Queen of Roads, connected Rome to southern Italy and still hosts foot traffic more than 2,000 years after its completion. Roman engineers surveyed terrain, built bridges and tunnels, and carved paths through mountains. Milestones marked distances, and maps detailed entire road networks for merchants, travelers, and soldiers. The roads didn't just move armies, they moved culture, commerce, and language. They were the veins of empire, pumping Roman life into every corner of its domain. Today, we drive on their bones. Though Latin may be a dead language, it's very much alive in your mouth if you speak Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, or Romanian. These Romance languages all evolved from vulgar Latin, the everyday speech of soldiers, merchants, and settlers. As the Roman Empire expanded, Latin mixed with local dialects, forming regional variations. Over centuries, as the empire collapsed and new kingdoms rose, these dialects diverged and developed into separate languages. But their roots remain unmistakable. Even English, a Germanic language, has absorbed thousands of Latin words, especially through French influence. Terms like animal, justice, manual, and culture trace back to Rome. Latin was the language of law, science, religion, and scholarship for over a millennium after the empire's fall. It shaped church doctrine, medical texts, and legal systems that still echo today. To speak a Romance language is to echo the empire. The words may have shifted. The accents changed, but hidden in every sentence is the voice of ancient Rome, whispering across time.